Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me start by saying that I know my friend from Virginia is speaking in good faith when he expresses his support for this deal. But I think the Obama-Iran nuclear deal was flawed in virtually every respect. In my judgment, the threat of a nuclear Iran is the single greatest national security threat facing the United States. And the Obama-Iran nuclear deal was the most catastrophic international agreement since Neville Chamberlain led the United Kingdom. It was flawed on multiple fronts. On one front, it gave $150 billion to the Ayatollah Khamenei, to the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. It did so while the Ayatollah was chanting death to America and death to Israel. Literally, as we negotiated the deal, the Ayatollah would lead mobs in chanting death to America. And history teaches us when someone tells you they want to kill you, we should believe them. The deal on its face would have led inexorably to a nuclear Iran. It was designed to be utterly unenforceable. On the face of the deal, numerous sites were deemed exempt from inspections. Military sites were deemed exempt from inspections, which of course means that's naturally where the Iranian regime would engage in additional nuclear research. It also required 21 days advance notice to the regime before any inspection, a provision certain to encourage cheating. And indeed, in some circumstances, the agreement provided that Iran would inspect itself, a provision so laughably weak, the only consequence of the Iran deal that would have occurred is that Iran would acquire nuclear weapons. We now know, thanks to Israel's heroic work seizing Iranian records, that Iran has cheated from day one and continues to cheat. And the only question is Iran better off with $150 billion or without $150 billion? And I believe pulling out of the disastrous Obama-Iran nuclear deal is the single most important national security decision the Trump administration has made. And the maximum pressure campaign is exactly the right approach. Now listen, Iran remains profoundly dangerous, but I'd much rather a weakened Iran with billions of dollars less resources to use to pay terrorists to kill Americans and to fund nuclear research than an Iran flush with cash racing to catch up with North Korea and use nuclear weapons and ICBMs to threaten the lives of millions of Americans. Now, Mr. Hook, you talked about major provisions of the Iran deal expiring, major provisions such as the arms embargo and the ballistic missile test ban expiring, and I agree that that is highly troubling. There is an obvious remedy to that, which is under the terms of Resolution 2231, you have the snapback sanctions. And we now have a situation where Iran's conduct has gotten even worse. Even our European allies acknowledge that Iran committed a serious act of war in bombing Saudi Arabia and taking out about half of their oil production capability.
That's what Trump said.
That act of war merits a real response. Two questions. Does state believe the United States is able to trigger the snapback mechanism? And number two, should we trigger the snapback mechanism?
And Senator, thank you for your question. I read your letter from July 2nd, I believe to Secretary Pompeo, that raises this question. And it's something which Senator Rubio and I discussed earlier about whether we can and whether we should reimpose, use the 2231 to trigger the snapback of the sanctions. I've raised this with our legal advisor's office. I know it's been in discussion with the NSC legal advisor. It's a question of, it's a procedural question, an interpretation of 2231 that turns around what the definition of some of the various terms are, like participant and other things. I think yours is a very plausible reading. What we have done since leaving the deal is allow other countries to decide whether to stay in the deal. Obviously, I think even as the French foreign minister said recently after the attacks on Abqaiq on September 14th, it's a seminal event. It's a game changer. I can't remember exactly how he described it, but it's something that we should take another look at, and appreciate you raising it to our attention.
Well, I would certainly encourage you. On my reading, I believe that we have full authority to invoke the snapback sanctions, and particularly given this recent attack against Saudi Arabia, I think we should invoke the snapback sanctions. I think that is a natural response. Second question, you and I have had multiple conversations about the civilian nuclear waivers. As you know, another round of waivers is coming up in the next couple of weeks. We have waivers right now allowing them to continue construction at the underground Fordo nuclear bunker, a bunker built into the side of a mountain to build nuclear weapons. We also have a waiver allowing Iran to continue working on the Iraq plutonium-producing reactor, which Secretary Pompeo has rightly says needs to be shut down anyway. Isn't it time to end these waivers and shut down the Fordo nuclear bunker and the Iraq plutonium-producing facility?
You are correct that the current, there are 5 restrictions that are currently in place. Secretary Pompeo extended those restrictions on June 30th. You're correct. Those are going to expire very soon on October 29th. What we have done is we have, over the course of a couple of years now, tightened the restrictions on Iran's nuclear program. We did sanction the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran in November of 2018. In March of this year, we imposed new sanctions on nuclear scientists who were linked to Iran's WMD proliferation-sensitive activities. Secretary Pompeo on July 30th then extended those 5 restrictions around Iraq, Fordo, Bushehr, the Tehran research reactor. And so he'll have a decision to make coming up. You have been a thought leader on this subject, and we will make sure that is all before the Secretary, before he makes his decision.
Well, I would strongly urge that you not extend the waivers, particularly given Iran's spectacularly bad conduct.